numerous groups on a variety of automotive topics. He has worked as an industry consultant providing services to corporate, financial, and government clients on various aspects of automotive design, marketing, advertising, publications, and policy. For almost 6 years, he co-hosted the popular weekly radio program About Cars on the then 12-station Wisconsin Public Radio Network, at which point he was fired. You might have to ask him about that. In 1996, he moved his program to a Madison commercial radio station, and that 2-hour Saturday program, All About Cars, was syndicated on 3 radio stations in Wisconsin and streamed onto the web through October 2003. Matt is a recognized automotive authority. He has worked on automotive textbooks, has been a guest on regional and national radio and TV talk and news programs. He has advised and worked on camera on several TV production assignments as a regular commentator on and consultant to Madison TV station, channel3000.com, Madison TV. In addition to his broadcasting, consulting, writing, and speaking activities, Matt has sold rights to his automotive inventions. He owns and operates a small automotive research and consulting firm, Matco. Matco also operates a small auto restoration shop in South Central Wisconsin. Welcome, Mr. Joseph.
Thank you. Had I heard that data sheet, which I'm sorry to say I wrote, and never expected all of it to be reproduced, much less read, I would think of it as a very tall vat of very thin soup. But
he's humble too.
So how many people got here in an autonomous vehicle today? There's a surprise.
Is that carpooling?
That's carpooling.
That's not autonomous. We're talking machine here. Okay, one of the sheets I gave you has a ponderous list of actually 6 levels of autonomous vehicles. Yes, I know it goes 0 through 4, but I count 0. And there's a mistake. The people who wrote that, unfortunately, the SAE seemed to think that the 2017 or 18 Kia Rio is a level 0. It's not. The other example, the Porsche is. Level 0 couldn't have what is required by law at this point, which is ABS braking. That's the beginning. That's the earliest form of U, if you're old enough, because this goes back to the mid to late 80s. You ceded control of a function of your vehicle to a computer. And that was the first time you ever did that. And the rest happened very quickly. Anyway, you might want to read those. And as we talk about autonomous vehicles, the place where the action's going to be is level 4 in that series of definitions of the levels. Level 5 is way off. In level 5, you probably don't have a steering wheel or pedals. But level 4 is where we're really aimed right now, and we're not there yet. Early autonomous vehicles, if you might count the Tesla, they're out there, 2019 production in most cases, other than Tesla, which has already done some production. But they're certainly not common, which is why nobody drove here today in one. They might not have wanted to, even if they could. It is suggested at some point the government, and this depends on how evil you think government is as an entity, as a principle, as a reality, but there at some point would be the possibility of the government, for reasons that we can go into, ruling all non-autonomous vehicles off the road. That is out there as a suggestion. Personally, I know it won't be in my lifetime, and it's very unlikely for a while, but ultimately, when you look at the things that these vehicles will do for us, you can see why a government might do that. You can also see why a lot of businesses would dearly like to see it done someday. Anyway, right now we have a commitment by the auto industry to pursue and market and invest vast amounts of money in autonomous vehicles, self-driving cars, when there is absolutely no market for them, where every survey has shown enormous consumer resistance. If you ask people how likely are you to buy one of these things, you're looking at 2%. And that's never in automotive history, because I'm an automotive historian by nature and by profession. Never has the industry gone wild investing in something for which there is no apparent market. This is, and the theory is, if you want to grab one of each of those sheets back there, it's unprecedented, it's nonsensical. I mean, usually there's extensive research. Do you want this particular computerized function in your car or not? And the research is analyzed and tortured until it yields a result. And if the result is no, the one exception was, many years ago I was underneath a Buick that we were test driving. And I saw a bunch of holes out near the axle stamped into the platform. Like, what are those? I never saw anything quite like that before. But I got a hold of Terry Derhacky, who was a very nice guy, who was a Buick engineer, suspension engineer. I said, is that what I think it is? And he said, what do you think it is? I said, well, where those holes are suggests to me that maybe you're going to go for four-wheel steering, which the Japanese were doing at that point, Nissan particularly, Honda with a mechanical system. And he said, that's right. And I said, well, if you don't have a system, why are you punching holes in the chassis for? And he said, well, we just want to see if the Japanese are successful with it. And if they are, then we'll put it in and we'll be ready for it. And usually that's the attitude of the auto industry. They have two motivating things. They don't want to scrap existing tooling because it costs too much, and they don't want to get out ahead of a trend that might not occur. Anyway, second issue I want to bring up is when we talk about autonomous vehicles, we're going to be talking about electrical vehicles, electrically driven, battery operated. Maybe to a lesser extent there's some discussion of hybrids, but you're not talking about turning the vehicle you drove into someday into an autonomous vehicle. And there are reasons for that. One reason is the industry particularly does not like the sort of boom and bust cycle it's been in since its beginning. And that boom and bust cycle in many ways parallels oil prices. Oil prices go up, they cycle down. With electricity, it's not a boom and bust cycle, particularly as you move to and this is one of the good sides of autonomous vehicles. You move to regenerated electricity. Hydro, you can't move any closer to because the sites are gone, but solar, wind, and a lot of other things are possible. And that would mean a very even kind of energy cost for driving a vehicle. And they like that. You get rid of the troughs and mountains. Essentially, there are a number of problems. This is all in the outline that's in your stuff. There are a number of problems that the EV, electric, autonomous vehicle can solve. There are also a number of problems that it may create, and we're going to try and look at both of those. Looking at, if I, by the way, run on and you need to ask a question, do so. Just don't even put your hand up, just blurt. You will see solutions to some of these problems, but the EV electric autonomous vehicle is the big one. Distracted driving. There's no distraction. The thing drives. Even if it's co-driven by a human being, it still jams the brakes on automatically, except in Tempe, Arizona recently when it didn't. And say a couple of words about that. I know the industry was all ready for that one. It was going to happen sooner or later. And this was particularly unfortunate because, yes, you could blame the human co-pilot because he was looking down when it happened, but the vehicle still should have stopped.
She was in a crosswalk and everything, right?
No, she wasn't. Yeah, that was big. She was out of a crosswalk. So, wait a minute.
Yeah.
Exactly. Tell me that the vehicle is told to pay less attention to pedestrians when they're out of the crosswalk,
Right,
that the vehicle is even mapped to know where the crosswalk is because it's running off GPS and it may not be that accurate. GPS has some problems and you really need something better than that if you ever go to a mass kind of thing. And we'll get into the things that you would need in a second. Traffic congestion. Now, would somebody tell me how an autonomous vehicle will solve traffic congestion?
Easy.
Okay.
they're going to be all at a similar speed,
And,
rather than changing lanes
and a small distance.
and a shorter
So you
distance
get
because of the
more of
reaction
them
time
on the
faster.
road.
Exactly.
Of course, the people riding in the car might get a bit blue, but yeah, I love it. I mean, 3 feet apart, traveling at 61.5 miles an hour.
Exactly.
Something unexpected happens up ahead, and they all it's within the stopping. Hey, when I was a kid, 600 feet from 60 miles an hour, about 120 to 130 today. So that distance has been closing. Some of you are old enough to have children and grandchildren. I have grandchildren. What that means is that when you get in the car with your kid, my sons would be saying, "Dad, why are you leaving that gap? Someone's going to jump into it." And if they were driving, I'd be saying, "Back off, back off." I never got fully used to, you don't get used to things like inflation and vehicle following distances. You just sort of carry what you knew most of your life. Okay, so that's one. Impaired driving, we mentioned, traffic congestion. If you have more cars on the same roads, gee, you cut your construction costs. You don't have to build new roads. That saves a lot of money. That might be really interesting in view of what the autonomous vehicle does to the whole highway industry, which we'll look at too. Accidents, you reduce them. You really do. What happened in Tempe was unfortunate. I've been an automotive reporter most of my career, and I always hate siding with the industry on any issue. I don't trust the industry, it lies, but it is true that an autonomous vehicle, when fully developed, will outperform any human being. It's like ABS brakes. When they came out, people would say, "Well, I can stop a car faster than that thing can." But that really missed 2 points. The first is it wasn't made to stop a car faster. It was made to give you controllability in a skid. Incidentally, it did stop it faster, but that was not the design purpose. 2, I knew a lot of drivers on these things, test drivers, and they said, "Oh, I can do better than that." I said, "Okay, I can't. But you apparently have learned how to pulse brakes individually at high frequency." I could, just given a brake pedal, I could never quite figure out how to do that. Independent living. Yeah, the vehicle can pick you up, take you there, drop you off, go off to another job, pick you up. That's good stuff. Delivery costs. It was very promising for delivery costs until drones looked more promising, but yeah, it cuts Mr. Bezos' delivery bill nicely and everybody else's who deliver things. Okay, those are the good things that we can think of off the top of our heads. Let's look at some of the things that might not be, well, it might not be as good for most people. I think that's the best way to put this. Okay, has anyone noticed, or is this just my observation, that the roads in Wisconsin have become terrible? The state that birthed the Good Roads movement in the 1920s, you know about that? It became a national movement, birthed here. Signage, pavement quality, hard to believe, isn't it? Google it, Good Roads movement, Wisconsin. We were the country's leader. And we can't really afford to fix them. At least we're told we can't afford to fix them because we've diverted so much money into tax cuts for the super wealthy and the reasonably wealthy that we're broke. And we keep passing tax cuts. So if we went to a system done in many places in this country and some other places in the world where our highways, to get them fixed, basically, that'd be the reason for it, we sort of turn them over to private enterprise. Is a great idea. That way, and the private enterprise can actually, they're so efficient, as you've noticed in your daily lives, that they can manage our roads, repair our roads, make a huge profit, and still deliver us transportation capability at a lower cost than the state does. Right. Not likely, but that's part of the mythology that put Mr. Trump in office and Mr. Bush before him, so you don't want to argue uphill on the thing. So now we have corporations owning the road. It's not inevitable, but people better stay awake if they want to stop it, because there's going to be a push and there's going to be a lot of money behind it, and money speaks. They own the roads. Now we have autonomous vehicles. Anyone heard of subscription services yet? That's a euphemism. The car companies use that term, and it's beginning to come into public view. The subscription service, you don't own a car. You probably, at that point, can't afford a car because it's got autonomous capabilities, and the price, 50% of the car is electronics at that point. And I'm not even mentioning the drive system. So you have this car, but you can't afford it. And it's much more efficient to deliver you the car when you need it, and then it goes someplace else and somebody else needs it. You can reduce the size of the fleet. Great. So now we have that kind of a service for cars, and we have roads that are corporately owned. In other words, the minute you get to the end of your driveway or your apartment building's driveway, or get your car out of the underground parking, you're not on public roads. You're on private roads. Now, it's a matter of time till somebody, and I was talking about this stuff 5 or 6 years ago, and nobody believed me. Somebody figures out where you could package the whole thing so that you get, instead of, when you go out of your driveway, GPS or other system picks you up and says, hey, he's on the ABC Transportation Corporation's road, and you start paying a meter cost for every mile you drive on it till you get into another company's road. Great. Now, what if the cost of the vehicle, which has become the subscription cost of using it for XYZ number of miles per week, month, or year, whatever it is, the cost of that is packaged, insurance is factored in, recharging is factored in, and transportation on the road is factored in. Now you open opportunity for great investment, because it's not just big guys investing. Little people can own little patches of roads. There can be consortiums all over the place, all coordinated by great big cloud computers that basically say, Mr. Joseph, you drove so many miles, emailed to me, of course, or automatically deducted from some account. You put so many miles on the roads owned by 132 corporations, and that's XYZ miles, whatever they chose to charge you for what you did on their road, and here's your bill. Good luck disputing it. It would be incredibly complex. That's a distinct possibility. Transportation services, I call it. The first you'll hear about it is subscription services. Ford in particular is already experimenting with that concept. What has to happen to get to the autonomous vehicle? We're not there yet. A lot of things have to happen. For one thing, you're going to need better infrastructure. Basically, GPS is not...
I have a question here, though. It seems to me that another scenario is that we're going to go to public mass transportation, and these EVs, or these autonomous vehicles, will be used as local delivery only. I mean, if you take it to the railroad, you get on a rail, which is going to take you to Chicago. You're not going to take an EV down, or an autonomous vehicle down there. And then when you get back to the station, it picks you up and takes you home. I mean, you actually see to the point, I mean, like you're saying...
What you're saying is highly desirable, from my point of view and from your point of view. Mm-hmm. But it historically is not the way things have happened. Think of the Red Line in Los Angeles. What happens is the shared community services get driven out of existence by big money, because you can make a lot more money on what I'm talking about than you can on shared vehicles. If we play our cards right, if we elect the right people, if we put up the right logical fight, we might get what you're talking about. But if we don't, and that's really the whole point of what's being said here, if we don't, we will end up with what I'm talking about. I'm not advocating, I'm just describing something that could happen. And frankly, I think it's the most likely thing to happen. It's the nature of how the society has operated for the last 200 years, and certainly intensively for the last 50 years. You would need, in the ideal automated vehicle world, you would need a lot more than you're looking at. For example, if you've seen the little Google cars, the Waymo cars, as they're now called, They have a little rotating thing on top. That's sort of like the early rotating thing that was used for night vision, only it became a smaller rotating thing in the grill. It also had to be super cool just about. All that's gone. It's now in a chip in a solid state. What you're seeing is LiDAR up there. It's a light radar, presently a pulsed laser beam, and used as radar to return time and so forth, the sequence. That system is very good. It does very good imaging. Computers sort out what the image is. Other systems are also parallel to it, photographic systems. Artificial intelligence sorts that out. So you get some confirmation on it. However, the LiDAR is much too expensive to produce. It is much too finicky. And right now you have people working, getting close to a solution to what's called solid state LiDAR, where it is a chip. And the chip does the whole thing. It emits the light, it receives the light, it does early processing and so forth. The image processing is later, but you're getting there, but you have to have that. Ideally, you're going to have repeaters. You're going to have what's called V2V communication. You have two cars approaching each other on either side of a building at 90 degrees like this. They need to talk to each other. Now, if they're approaching each other like this, they can do that. They have a protocol, they establish communication. This one's the one that worries us because, this is one of many, but this is a good example of it. These two vehicles are going to crash at the intersection unless they tell each other they're there. And to do that, they need to communicate between them, but to do that, they need a communications network capable of doing that. You also need to verify GPS because it isn't accurate enough. You need implants in the road telling the vehicle, hey, check where you are. Also, GPS can't always be received. You've driven the same thing that causes you to lose your satellite radio signal when you drive along the side of a hill sometimes. Tall buildings are a problem. So you need repeater stations, you need road implants. This is all hugely expensive stuff. Again, the huge expense of it leads you back to this concept of corporations essentially paying for it and you paying for the corporations. In the AV future world developing, in the near situation, the near years, you have enough out there without the hardwired terrestrial structure, without a lot of things. You have enough to get stuff on the road that will do it, but it's going to be too cumbersome, expensive, and you're going to have lapses in it, such as you had in Tempe, Arizona. There's also a series of issues with things like natural resources. Lithium you know about. There are a lot of other things, germanium. There are a lot of things that are needed to produce these vehicles in quantity. And then there's the ever-present issue of the grid, which would collapse instantly if 10% of the cars were electrified. The charging would collapse it. So you need to replace essentially the grid and a great deal of local service, and that's, again, expensive. You need critical hardware to be developed, and all the developments that you need have to come together somewhat simultaneously. They have to come together at about the same time. Just getting a piece here and a piece down the road and a piece further down the road doesn't really address the issues. Cost trajectories. You're going to have enormous costs. The vehicle itself will be brutally expensive when fully developed. You're going to have all the infrastructure costs I talked about. There will be advances that then have to be paid for because they have to occur somewhat simultaneously. All of these things cost money. Now, what do you think the hottest concept car on the world, just introduced at Geneva, what do you think it is? Anyone know? This is the one that the automotive press is just going crazy over.
It's not one of the Tesla.
It's not a Tesla.
No, it's not.
Honda?
Actually, a Jaguar.
Oh.
Or as they say, Jaguar.
Okay.
Jaguar sometimes. It's the I-Pace. And interesting, you wouldn't have thought that the country that birthed Lucas Electric, and we could tell Lucas Electric jokes if you like, who was the Prince of Darkness? Joseph Lucas. There are a bunch of them. Why do the British drink warm beer? Lucas refrigerators. You look like you know some.
Let's see, in my garage right at the moment are 7 Triumphs, 1 Norton.
I only have 2 Triumphs. My friend has a
Mine
Norton. I got 2
mine are
MVs.
2-wheelers.
Ah, okay.
Yeah. Almost all Bonnevilles, 1 Thunderbird, full Thunderbird. So yeah, I know all the jokes about
Well, when you finish that stuff, come on, help me finish some of my stuff.
it. Is it a car?
It's
God, I hate those.
multiple cars.
I hate those.
I'm getting there. I have to look at my outline to remember where I was. Oh, yes, iPace, thank you. Well, yeah, this is the hottest thing. You know, years ago when we became worried about fuel economy, before we had horizontal drilling and all that good stuff, where we could blissfully not worry about it for a few years, or at least the stupider among us wouldn't worry about it, I noticed a trend in Detroit to take fairly conventional engineering, things that have been around for a long time, and essentially do what GM was so good at doing, reduce the cost of them. You know, somebody else invented them, but GM figured out how to make it cheap. And then package the thing in a way that you got an increase in fuel economy. So the turbocharger, which has been around forever, but it was made cheap, it was made reliable, the overheating problems are solved, the bearing problems are solved. Suddenly you had turbochargers and everything, so you had smaller displacement, more efficient engines putting out the power. Now your standard engine in a Ford F-150 it's a 4 at this point, or a 6, but it's going down to a 4 EcoBoost. All of the things, when I mentioned braking, the increase in the efficiency of braking, people just left more space or less space between cars. You know, every time engineers came up with something, people figured out how to misuse it. And the great example of, I'll get back to the iPace in a second, the great example of this was that we increased fuel economy. When I was growing up, good fuel economy was 10 or 11 miles per gallon. You know, it's now in the high 20s or 30s. But we made up for that after a skirmish with small cars in the 60s and 70s. We then went back to bigger cars. We repackaged the Ford Country Squire into many things. First, a minivan, which had about the same footprint, same cargo area, more height. Eventually into the SUV, and now in our final stage of development for the time being, we're into the crossover SUV. And the crossover SUV simply repackages what every American has a birthright to, which is definitely more vehicle than they could possibly use. And we now package that thing, and that becomes the standard. The autonomous vehicle, electrified autonomous vehicles, the two are just about married, that vehicle is going to end up being the crossover SUV. The iPace is a perfect example. It's autonomous, or somewhat autonomous, level 3 autonomous. It's concept only, it's not production. It has great fuel efficiency, being an electric. It obviously doesn't pollute because it doesn't have a tailpipe. That's a myth. Things without tailpipes do pollute. You just move the source of pollution to someplace invisible. You also have tremendous inefficiency because of the inductive losses of bringing the electricity to where you're going to actually charge the vehicle. But it appears to solve the problem, and yet it perpetuates the problem because it goes right back to people driving more vehicle than they need. How many people in this room drive a small, say a 4-door, 2-door, 5-door sedan? That's good, but that's not typical. Unfortunately, people have learned to abuse that. And one of the fears with autonomous vehicles is that we'll follow exactly that prescription that we've followed before. We'll simply use the efficiencies we gain. The worst of them is people just driving more miles. And that distinctly is possible, a lot more miles with an autonomous vehicle. After all, you can be entertained while you drive.
Going along with that, and following the history of GM back in the 40s and 50s, when we started putting up the freeway system, and GM got all over, cars for the, freeway before it was even built. don't you think that with an autonomous vehicle, that people are going to be more likely to move away from city centers? Because now, instead of that hour commute that they had in California, they have an hour work time or rest, or because the vehicle is doing a function that they used to have to
You know,
do.
damn it, I try and think of everything, particularly the interesting stuff. And here I hadn't thought of that, but you're absolutely right. But I resent that. I mean, it's supposed to be mine.
Well, good. I won't tell you the other Lucas joke of the light switch for Lucas,
Yeah,
on, dim, flicker.
good. No, you're absolutely right. You will continue the ex-urbanite kind of thing. You will get more sprawling development because, as you didn't say, but also a point is, you get into the vehicle and you can watch a video, you can deal with your email. You're not really. So yeah, that's a good point that I hadn't thought of.
And I don't mean to blow up your entire speech, but
This might not be as good, you know.
the autonomous vehicle has been around since the 60s.
The science fiction's been around a lot longer than that.
I'm sorry?
The science fiction's been around a lot.
No, the practicality. Because they were first built for being warehouse
Yeah,
machines.
NASA messed with them for moving stuff, right.
Yeah, and being a forklift
Well, it's called the AGV, automatically guided vehicle.
vehicle.
That was
And
used.
that's where a lot of the crosstalk of what you talked about the two intersecting vehicles coming.
Right.
Okay, that's where that was proved.
Where was
It's
that
been overcome.
invented? Where was it first made operational?
Where?
Yeah,
Right here in West Dallas.
that's right.
You know the company?
Very few, yeah. I knew the guy who managed that program, and the story he told was great. He let everybody else in. Alice Chalmers, what Rogers,
No, it was Kearney and Trecker.
I think,
Kearney and Trecker built it for Ellis Chalmers.
okay. Alice Chalmers had Kearney and Trecker built an AGV plant of the future. It had machining centers, which we didn't hear about those till years later. It had AGVs running around.
Yep.
It was Roger Smith's lights out 24-hour plant.
Mm-hmm.
And you know the fate of that thing? Because it's fascinating. I knew the guy who managed it. I was teaching
Me for Ellis Chalmers.
for Alice Chalmers.
Yeah.
I didn't know. I thought Alice had built the thing
No.
themselves.
Kearney and Trecker put it together with them, and the reason why Ellis Chalmers chose them is in the mid-50s, Kearney and Trecker went over to one of the Danish countries and put in a lights-out machine shop because they couldn't get workers to work second and third shift. And so Kearney and Trecker designed, built, and installed a lights-out machine shop in one of the Danish countries so that it would run second and third shift with just a skeleton crew of 3 or 4 people.
And this is literally the beginning of the
And my dad was the engineer of it.
okay. The guy I knew managed it in its latter years.
Yep.
And he said the first thing that he noticed was that people from all over Europe and all over Asia were coming in and looking at it.
Yep.
And they were snapping pictures and taking notes. And he went to management. He said, I don't think you really want to encourage that. And management said the equivalent of, look, these are Asian people, European people, and they're not very bright. And they can look, but they couldn't possibly duplicate it because they've got little hands, just like the president. And, you know, they're pure, unadulterated racism. They're too stupid. That was wrong. But at the end of the run of that plant, the plant wore out. The machinery wore out. And Alice wouldn't spend anything trying to bring it back up to date. And eventually, when the thing was dismantled, it was sold for literally iron, steel iron
Yes. Well, plus the fact Ellis Chalmers at that time was going downhill very quickly.
Here it was in West Dallas, and that was the beginning.
1967.
Not the technology of that period, but certainly the idea for autonomous self-driving things came from exactly that incident. Okay, moral issues. Well, did anyone decipher the code in my note here? About the Girl Scouts?
No, what about, what was my
Well, I love Girl Scouts. They come around once a year with cookies. Okay, I'm gonna, you have a, I should use the thing at once in every presentation.
Sure.
My
Is there
art
a marker
abilities
there
are
for
not
you?
great. Well,
That's
I don't really get the color I want.
the smart board. That's
Yeah.
this, you wanna use this one? That's for the smart
Oh.
board. So, you think they'd have, maybe they're housed in here, inside the,
That's an
everybody
eraser.
see any, I know, I thought maybe they had the
We'll
markers
pretend I'm
inside.
drawing. Okay, we have a troop of Girl Scouts marching down the side of the road. We have an out-of-control semi coming toward them. We have an automatically guided vehicle or partially autonomous vehicle on the, here. Multiply this by thousands, and these are our Girl Scouts. The semi is coming down the road. Let's see. The autonomous vehicle is here. The semi is here, veering this way. And the autonomous vehicle then has to make a decision. Now, it's been programmed with the algorithms that tell it what to do. Forget the artwork. The point of the thing is, the autonomous vehicle has a choice. The choice is it can mow down the troop of Girl Scouts and their cookies, and you're
Yeah.
leaving for the cookies too. Or it can wipe out the people in the autonomously driven vehicle by smashing head-on into the truck. Any ideas?
Depends on how-
Girl Scout cookies in it?
How come they don't just stop?
I will stipulate, although I don't know, but I will
Why
stipulate
don't they
that
just stop?
They
Why
can't,
do they
there
have to
isn't,
make a choice?
there isn't time,
Oh,
and that can be calculated. Picture a million situations where a choice has to be made for the welfare of many or the welfare of the people in
wow.
the, nobody cares about the truck, that's a goner, or no, it will survive it. But the point is, this thing, it wasn't always Girl Scouts, but variations of this were debated with great passion and even some compassion for weeks. And nobody could quite come over, they actually considered people with the most ridiculous title that the world has yet conferred, ethicists. That bothers me that you've trained someone to be an ethicist. It makes a lot of sense. But ethicists couldn't really solve the thing. And then Mercedes, on Mercedes engineering letterhead, issued a very brief statement on the topic. At Mercedes, we always consider the welfare of our customer first. End of discussion. And there's been very little debate over the Girl Scouts or whatever variation since then, which I find fascinating. To me, it's still, I would resolve it, but I wouldn't resolve it the way Mercedes resolved it. And then you get into very complicated things, like based on the information that the algorithms can impart or can digest and produce program, can they even comprehend what the moral dilemma is? They can certainly count how many people might die, I suppose, but say it's a school bus and you don't know who's in it. Do you have a preference for the school bus over the Mercedes? I don't know. Economic impact, and the question about that is literally who gets to make those decisions. As of now, the engineering departments, the car companies and programmers. Economic impacts of AVs. They will reduce employment. Think of things like delivery drivers, cab drivers. But look what Google and Lyft have already done to the cab driving profession in cities. Now this, of course, is good because it makes us more productive. All things that make us more productive must be good because we are told they are good. However, I can think of many industries where there's very little competition from anybody outside of this country. And we go to great lengths to make them more efficient, and I wonder why. Maybe the jobs are worth more. Farming might be one of them. You know, gee, maybe it's more important to employ people to give them some method of earning a living. Otherwise, if we don't do that, we're going to have to come to grips with one of the great questions of the Republic. And I don't think anybody wants to do that. The question is, how do you compensate people? How do you remunerate people when there's enough? 1900, 52% of the American people involved in the cultivation, harvesting, distribution, processing of food, 52%. Now about 3. And we've absorbed that, sort of. It's called the service industry. We had manufacturing in this country. We don't. It's pretty much gone. You know, imposing a tariff on Chinese manufacturing, that's brilliant. It'll drive the price of every item in the dollar store up double. That's going to do a lot of good. It's regressive. It'll hit the people who are going to least able to afford it hardest. But we need to consider what this great leap in human technology. Now, some of these things are inevitable, and some of these things are really hard to counteract, and some of them are attractive, and some look stupider than hell. This one, it looks good, and it's going to be very hard to stop. But the question is, do you control it? Do you regulate it? Do you stage it? Do you say, okay, we're going to maintain some cab drivers, maybe quite a few of them? Is there any overreaching need for efficiency in the city? If you say safety, yes, that might be a plausible argument. But efficiency? I mean, what do we do with the efficiency we've gained? The Chinese aren't exactly going to import cab services. By its nature, it's like soft drinks. It's pretty hard to import it. Which raises the issue of regulation. Now, I spelled it there with protections.
Yes.
That ain't what they're going to call them.
I know, they're going to call them regulations, but we need to always call them protections.
I don't have any problem calling them regulations. That's what they are. They are regulations. They regulate.
They made that out to be a very dirty word. So they protect.
You know, part of the problem is we keep conceding words.
Yeah.
And I want to take some words back.
Yeah. Okay.
We've virtually conceded, and my dear wife of 52 years, and from her point of view, long, hard suffering years, but she occasionally, having worked for the government most of her life, will make one of those derogatory remarks about government. I always correct her, and oh yeah, you're right. But it's very easy, that's government work, or something like that. We need to reclaim the word government. Government can, and for most of our history, has produced a positive good in people's lives, and it still does, and it could do so much more if a bunch of morons hadn't degraded the word.
It's okay to say government.
And it's okay to say regulation, but it's got to be intelligent regulation.
Well, let's learn another word. The theory of anarchy, when one of these self-driving vehicles breaks down on the belt line at 4:30 in the afternoon.
You know, that's an interesting point. There's a great movement right now in the autonomous vehicle world to have a system whereby when something goes seriously wrong, an individual sitting at sort of it's like a game console kind of thing with pedals and a steering wheel, and he or she takes over the vehicle and gets it to the side of the road. And it has to happen instantly and seamlessly. That's a big deal now.
Well,
For 45 years, I was an industrial electrician. I'd be really hungry if that system worked.
Yeah.
well, that's the whole thing, though. Aren't we really vulnerable whenever we're talking about all these electronics? And can't somebody come in and hack all this and just make a disaster for our world?
You know, security is making something so difficult to do that it's more convenient to do something else. Basically, the thief goes to another address. Yeah, machines can do that. They can break down stuff, they can mess everything up. But people can do something quite wonderful, too. They can lie down on a road, even just something simple like ticketing, carrying signs. They can mess up the machine's environment pretty nicely. We might want to consider that as a counter tactic.
You remember a few years ago, somebody hacked, was it a Jeep Cherokee?
Yeah.
And the driver lost control of the vehicle while somebody was...
There is no security in that stuff. I mean,
Yeah.
there's
So part of Judy's comment is very valid.
the security when it comes with the encryption. And encryption slows everything down. It slows the thief down, it slows the system down.
Yep.
You're going to need enormous computing power for these things anyway. Last point, continuity with the present. We need if we consider autonomous vehicles, at some level it will happen. But you need, again, regulation. You need to plan and implement continuity to the autonomous vehicle reality that takes into account the choppiness in the Tahoes and Suburbans and Expeditions, and dare I mention the Ford Valdez, otherwise known as the Skirt. We have those things, and then we have Kia Rios and the Subaru that I drive. And having smart cars, having both of those things on the road at the same time is what's particularly deadly. And the more virtuous one, to my way of thinking, is the one that always loses. It's laws of physics, mass, and energy. But the point is, we need to not get into that situation. We need something seamless so that there's no disadvantage to being a piloted car, so that the thing comes together. This is possible. It's expensive. We're just about at time now. Usually I don't talk this much in one of these things, but there was so much module, and you're going to like it. And you can have it any color you want. And you can even have a tattoo on it if you want.
Yeah. But there's a job and economic impact because the automobile insurance industry will be greatly reduced. There won't be a need for individuals to buy auto insurance when there are accidents. Presumably,
you will buy supplemental insurance because your auto insurance on the autonomous vehicle would likely be like Swiss cheese, in that they wouldn't want to cover anything really expensive to pay off. They couldn't get out of it completely unless they were regulated.
I'm talking about the property, I'm talking about the liability.
I'm talking about the liability too. They would probably they would tell you had insurance, and you would have insurance of sorts, but it'd be very much like Medicare. There are just all kinds of holes in the thing. So you would probably have to buy supplemental insurance on the insurance provided by the transportation company. And at that point, when you're buying the supplemental insurance, you still have a revenue stream. Remember, if you're an insurance agent, I don't know what level you work at, but an insurance agent is the very thing that the insurance companies have been trying to dispense with for years, and some of them have. So those jobs are probably gone anyway.
But accidents are going to be greatly reduced, right? So there's claim adjusters and
repairs.
Accidents will be reduced. Repairs would be part of the package. Accidents would be reduced, but you would probably have some individual who's somehow taken over control of the vehicle and crashed 3 vehicles in 2 years. The only way they're going to get the autonomous vehicle put in their hands by an autonomous transportation company is if they agree to carry their own supplemental liability. So there'd be opportunities for insurance companies.
it's going to be greatly reduced.
Yeah, right. Thank you. One more question.
I know everybody talks about how clean electric vehicles are, but you pointed out that if 10% of our cars became electric, it would collapse our electric grid.
Parts of it, yes.
Right. So, I don't know, I just like to point that out to people, that your car may be cleaner, but that electricity is coming from somewhere, and we're at a time right now where they're starting to wind down with the coal-fired generating plants and stuff. We're going to have to fire those back up again?
No, I don't think that's going to happen.
We're going to have more nuclear again, or what? So,
Well, nuclear to me makes a certain amount of sense, particularly if you go beyond nuclear to fusion. And the only way to get to fusion is to maintain some of the nuclear infrastructure. So there's a progression issue there, but that's far afield from what we're talking about. In terms of the inefficiency of electrics, everybody know about inductive losses in transmission? For those who don't, as you transmit down a wire, you create an induction field, and very quickly you can blow 50% of what you generated in inductive losses. So it's very inefficient. Any method of powering an electric car other than the hydrogen fuel cell, which has its own problems technologically, but any method of powering a car electrically involves that inductive loss. If you go to the hydrogen car, you have to hydrolyze the water, and if you try and hydrolyze it at the end of the electric line where the car is being refueled, you're going to have the inductive loss, plus you have an inefficient system of trying to create hydrogen. So, but yeah, it's very inefficient. And
That's kind of why the hybrid cars make more sense to me.
I think the internal combustion engine as we know it has another 30 to 50 years, and then I think there'll be alternatives that are better as a hybrid. There are opposed piston engines that are looking really good. The Achetti, the old TS3 actually from the 50s in England. There are a lot that, it's been around since 1887 or before. It's been around for a long time, 150 years almost by now. And yet, in terms of its development, you look at things like HCCI, HCCI. It's a cycle. It's a very strange cycle, diesel cycle at this point. It's wildly more efficient than anything in any engine today. It's being developed by Mazda and will actually go into production in 19 as a hybrid because it's only usable. It produces almost no torque and a lot of horsepower. And that doesn't drive a car, so it has to be coupled to a hybrid. But the idea of hybridized, there are many solutions. Pure electric is a solution in cities. Diesel is a solution in places like Wyoming. Hybrids are a solution in many, many places, and that's the one that I look at as being efficient. Could you make a hybrid autonomous? Certainly. But it becomes a pretty complex vehicle. It's much more effective with a simple battery electric. I'm running into your next session, which is the...
Thank you.
Thank you for coming.